Elizabeth Catlett arrives on the scene slightly after the Harlem Renaissance, but she certainly would have been aware of it and taken advantage of its achievements. She is a sculptor by primary trade, and that's why I have the photograph of her in the upper right. I want you to know that because she carries over an understanding of three-dimensional form to her printmaking, which we are going to be looking at in particular. She was a printmaker. She used prints to spread her ideas for social and political change. And the reason she preferred prints is that they were inexpensive enough so that they could be dispersed to a large audience. So she saw them as tools for helping to promote social change. She was influenced by a couple of important things. One is the Mexican muralists, particularly Diego Rivera. She also became acquainted with a Holocaust survivor, Victor Lowenfeld, who taught her the importance of human dignity and also the importance of justice. And I think she does carry those qualities over to the work she creates. The one that is on our left is the sharecropper. It is a linoleum cut, and it was done in the 1950s. A sharecropper is an individual who rented land. This begins after the Civil War when many ex-slaves became sharecroppers. The problem with this is that they became trapped in the system and the cycle of poverty. They could never make enough money to buy their own land or to break away from the person who actually owned the land. So it became a continuation of slavery, and the people actually endured rather harsh conditions. I think as you look at the lines on the face of the woman, you can get a sense for the leathery skin of someone who works the fields. At the same time, you can get a sense of the strength and the dignity and perhaps even the heroism of the person who's not giving up. She's continuing to work, and you do get the sense that she's going to endure through all of it and that she's going to triumph over her conditions. Okay, we're looking up at her from underneath. She has a hat on that's almost turning her into a religious figure, functioning a little bit like a halo could. She has strength in her expression, certainly a strong jawline, and she stands very upright despite her burden. She is poor. If you take a look at the garment that she's wearing, it's being held together by a pin. And if you look closely at the face, you're going to see that Elizabeth Catlett has carried over that three-dimensional quality from her sculpture to her linoleum cuts, because the lines actually seem to create a very three-dimensional element in the print. This is, again, the print. It is a print she made in black and white and a print she made in color. If we were in the classroom, I'd be asking you which one you preferred. I probably personally prefer the black and white. Maybe it's because that's the first one I saw, but I also like the way in which she creates three-dimensional form simply using a directional line. Elizabeth Catlett was born in the United States, but she will become a Mexican citizen. The reason for that is, and this work was created in the 1950s, Elizabeth Catlett had very strong communist leanings. By that I mean she cared about the worker and she cared about social justice, and consequently she was blacklisted. When she left the United States briefly to go to Mexico, the United States government contacted the Mexican government and said she was an undesirable alien, which caused her to be detained in a Mexican jail. She never really forgave the United States for this. So once the details of this were cleared up, she does remain in Mexico, where she will take citizenship and spend the rest of her life largely working as an artist. Her goal was to use art to serve people and to understand the way in which it could serve a social function. This is Catlett's Harriet Tubman. located on the left next to Jacob Lawrence's. Again, she favors black and white, I would say, in printmaking. The difference, and I leave it to you to see more than one difference between Catlett and Lawrence, but I think it's really the prominent position that she's given to a woman leader. She really has Harriet forcefully pointing to the future and aggressively leading everybody on. She's also given a very prominent position to a mother and child who is located under Harriet's arm in the right section of Catlett's print. Okay, for Elizabeth Catlett, the mother-child theme was particularly important. She saw African American women as sources of protection, as sources of strength, and also as the entity that would provide for continuity of African American culture. So what we're looking at on the left is a lithographic image of an African American mother embracing her two children with her arms that very clearly are intended to protect them and show concern, I think, on the expression of her face. Why are we looking at this? In part because I actually have a mask that Elizabeth Catlett owned. It's in the upper right. It is a Dan mask, D-A-N, from Africa, from the 20th century. And it's not always easy for me to actually show you a source point, something that can influence an African American artist or any other artist for that matter. But in this case, I can. And if you take a look at the broad planes, the triangular shape of the face, and perhaps even the shape of the mouth, you're going to be able to see that it is influencing the Madonna-like image, and I suggest Madonna almost in a religious sense, of the mother who is so protecting her children. And the solemn expression on the face of the mask and on the face of the mother. As a sculptor, Elizabeth Catlett also produced a number of images of mothers and children. I do at least want you to know one of these because the Philadelphia Museum of Art has one or two of these in their collection. And I'd like you to see mom here holding her child on her lap. The mother is very strong with large hands, very hefty legs and feet. Those feet are grounded. They are stable, touching the earth. And we get the sense not only that she's going to protect this child, but I'd like you to look at her line of vision. Okay, this lady is looking into the future, and she's seeing a future that is going to be very, very positive for her child. Okay, all of this also, I think, is influenced by African sources. The image in the middle is a West African piece, mother and child, and mom is doing the same thing. She's holding her child protectively against her body. It is the mother who cares for the child and passes on the beliefs, the values, and the traditions. Okay. Last, variations on a theme, and again, you can see some of these in the Philadelphia Museum of Art where Elizabeth Catlett's works are included. Dead before Elizabeth Catlett, who doesn't die until 2012, Jean-Michel Basquiat is going to become the first international African-American superstar. He is largely self-taught. He learns by going to art museums in New York City and Brooklyn, which was where he was living. He is going to be the first Black American artist to make a major mark in the international art world and be collected universally around the world. He's going to begin his career as a graffiti artist. His tag is going to be SAMO, S-A-M-O, which stands for same old shit. It's also almost certainly a play on the Little Black Sambo books that kids read, which should hint that at the core of Basquiat's art, there is going to be lurking a social comment. By the 1980s, he's going to be exhibiting in galleries and museums internationally, so he's going to have made it. His style, if we can be limited to only one, is neo-expressionism. Okay, a very powerful expression of ideas and feelings, but in a new way. So, neo-expressionism. He is also referred to as a primitivist, which simply means that he is self-taught. He's learned on his own from looking at books and looking in museums. One of the things that he does is to marry, to wed, to combine text and image, carrying over his graffiti heritage to his paintings. Images that are figurative in nature but also abstract. These are laden with meaning and often include social comments, particularly related to race, to class divisions within the United States, and to power struggles and political struggles and class struggles within the United States. Basquiat was born in Brooklyn, Haitian Hispanic background. When he was a little kid, he was hit by a car. His mom took him to the hospital. He had to stay for a while. I don't know why she did this, but she brought him a copy of Gray's Anatomy. So here's this little kid in the hospital, and what he's doing is learning about parts of the human body. That's going to show up in his art, including the horn players, which we're going to take a look at in a minute. Basquiat, in general, creates images that are colorful, densely packed, that do mix words and text with a heavy meaning. They have to be interpreted. He often has mask-like shapes, perhaps influenced by African art, and very simplified schematic images. Overall, there's a power to Basquiat's work, an energy, sometimes a kind of pulsing quality. The whole thing can read, I think, in a somewhat energized, aggressive manner. I leave that up to you in terms of interpreting and reacting to Basquiat's images. In some of them, I think you're going to be able to read some anger on the part of the artist. The one that well, let me point out the photos I have before we go to the horn players. I've got two images. The top one is Warhol and Basquiat. They do become friends and they exhibit together, they work together. When Warhol dies in 87, Basquiat's going to go into a real funk. And that is going to contribute to his drug use, which will ultimately kill him. He'll die of a heroin overdose when he is in his late 20s. It was hard for me to find a picture of Basquiat that showed him at all happy. The best that I could do is the one in the lower left, where he's coming close to a smile. Basquiat is an individual who had a sense, I think, of difficulty, of frustration, of being a black artist working in a white world. And when he did succeed with that, as we'll find out, I don't think it actually brought him true happiness. Okay, taking a look at the horn players, that's the painting that is located on the right. It's 32-2. It was painted by Basquiat in acrylic and oil paint stick in the 1980s, 1983. And it is created on 3 separate canvas panels. It depicts a couple of Basquiat's heroes. He loved music. He loved specific musicians, particularly jazz musicians. And there are depictions of 2 of his jazz heroes right here. Charlie Bird Parker, who's got the sax, and Parker's located on the left of the 3 panels, and Dizzy Gillespie, who has the trumpet, and Dizzy Gillespie's located on the right. There are references in words to Charlie Bird, Bird being his nickname, Parker, throughout this, and the reference, of course, is ornithology, which is written referencing Charlie Parker's nickname. Sometimes ornithology is misspelled, sometimes ornithology is crossed out. You will also find words about body parts, such as larynx and teeth, feet, or ear. These are references to the parts of the body associated with making musical sounds and reacting to music. Hearing as the ear would, tapping your feet as your feet would react to the music. On the left panel, also, again, laden with lots of meaning. And in order to get the full extent of that meaning, you have to interpret the words as well as the images. Pre, on the left panel, is the name of a daughter of Charlie Parker who died at the age of 2. So there's an element of a sadness, perhaps, in a past history for his heroes. This is definitely an homage to his heroes because it is in triptych form. That means 3-part canvas. Triptychs are usually reserved for religious subjects. In this one, then, through the use of coded images and blending words with images, Basquiat is elevating 2 of these great African American contributors to the level of hero and almost to a religious level at the same time. This is another Basquiat. This is a depiction of one of his boxers. Basquiat turned to the world of music and to the world of athletes, also warriors, prophets as heroes. These figures are often enlarged within the space and convey, I'm going to say in this case particularly, perhaps a powerfully aggressive strength to them. Let me show us another. Okay, this is Basquiat with Warhol. They had a show together, and they're both posed in a poster advertising this show as boxers. For Basquiat, among his heroes were several pretty important boxers. He did a number of T-shirts, in fact, with images that bear reference to them. The one smack dab in the center is Cassius Clay. That, of course, you all know is Muhammad Ali. And at the top, we have Sugar Ray Robinson, and in the bottom, we have Jersey Joe Walcott. Both of those boxers are shown with crowns. The crown is a symbol that Basquiat perhaps appropriates to replace what we might find in religious paintings as halos, but it's a way of indicating significance, awesomeness, and the status of hero. This is Basquiat's Irony of a Negro Policeman. And I want to show you this one because it's not always easy to interpret Basquiat's paintings, but in this one, we have a clear shot of doing so. It is definitely a social comment. It was created by Basquiat in 1981, and it is a reference to African Americans being controlled by a white society. The policeman, even though he joins the force, has become essentially complicit. I'm going to quote now from an author on the African diaspora when he's talking about, quote, institutionalized forms of whiteness and corrupt white regimes of power. Okay, what the deal here is with the policeman, he joins the force, and what that means is he enforces white rules. And for Basquiat, that became an irony that he didn't particularly approve of. The figure is large, he suggests power, but at the same time, his body is broken, it's fragmented, and his identity is being destroyed. He's wearing a hat, which becomes something like a cage that controls him, that seems to restrain him, perhaps even suggesting taking away who he is as a person. Basquiat also gives us a clue that we can read this with, and it's the word pawn, which has been scrawled into the lower right of the composition. This particular piece sold fairly quickly after it was made in 1982 for $13.5 million. In the case of Basquiat, one way to judge his fame is through the art market. Very quickly in the 80s, Basquiat became a winner in the world of art, and that has continued long after his death. This is his dust heads done in 1982. It is a painting that depicts 2 figures against a black background, which is typical in general of Basquiat. These figures are drug users, the title, and we actually have in this particular painting a signature along with a title and a date on the reverse that was put there by Jean-Michel Basquiat himself, including his name, Dust Heads, in 1982 or 82, giving the painting greater authenticity and perhaps increased value. It was, in fact, acquired by a private collector, a 33-year-old Malaysian financier, and it was purchased in 2013 for 48.8 million bucks. So the Basquiat market is essentially continuing to rise. This is a pretty good Basquiat. It is very powerful. It shows the diluted pupils of habitual drug users and the kind of frantic, rapid movements that might come along with this. Very bright, vivid colors, all suggesting power and energy. It also suggests an acquaintance with the drug, angel dust, that Basquiat himself, we think, was a user of angel dust. The background, inky black, very powerful lines, expressive colors, rich colors, broad acrylic brushwork. He's also scribbled on the surface with oil stick, and we think that he's gone over the surface with his fingers. I haven't seen this painting in person, but I have read that the artist also clawed at the surface. Any of those personal marks are going to increase the expressive power of the painting. Very mask-like faces, hypnotic kind of vision of the drug user, almost in a kind of trance-like state. The power and expressiveness would link this to neo-expressionism. Okay, this is another picture just to look at in passing. This is a painting that, excuse me. Okay. This particular painting helps to document the rise in prices for Basquiat, selling for $110 million in 2017. The Japanese entrepreneur who acquired this is in the picture with the painting on our upper right, and it helps us to see we have really achieved an international art market for Basquiat paintings. It also helps us to see the scale of these pictures. They fall in the tradition of abstract expressionism in terms of their scale and in terms of their size. Okay. Basquiat does sell his first picture in 1981. By 1982, he's in hot demand in New York City. That demand is going to continue to grow, fueled by a desire to acquire neo-expressionist paintings. By 1985, his picture is going to be on the cover of New York Times Magazine. What I'd like you to sense out of all of this is that the fame and fortune that Basquiat went for and was successful in achieving doesn't seem to actually have given him the happiness that perhaps he thought it would. He is filled with contradictions, both on the cover of the New York Times Magazine and in the photograph of Basquiat by James Van Der Zee, who began his career during the Harlem Renaissance and will continue working through the 20th century. This is a photo late in Van Der Zee's career that I think truly captures the dissatisfaction of Basquiat having broken into the world of art in New York City. He's wearing an Armani jacket, but paint-spattered pants. He's holding a Siamese pussycat. Not even the pussycat looks happy. And Basquiat seems to be lost in an expression of drifting away in disillusionment and dissatisfaction. He painted the picture on the left, which I think echoes his continuing unhappiness as his fame continues to rise simultaneously. It's called Riding with Death. It was done in 1988, shortly before he dies of a heroin overdose in his late 20s. The image that we're looking at, again, Riding with Death, top right, may in fact be influenced by Albrecht Dürer. The image on the bottom right is a Dürer from the 16th century. It's a detail. Basquiat knew Dürer. He knew a lot of artists from their works in books, sometimes in museums. But this is called King Death, and it depicts the figure of death riding a kind of nag-like horse, but the figure of death is wearing a crown. Now, I'm not going to say for certain that that's where Basquiat got the crown, because the crown is kind of a universal symbol, but it does indeed show up in a lot of Basquiat's images. I do think the idea of death riding a horse is owed to having viewed works by Albert Dürer. Okay, over on the right is one of Basquiat's, I'm going to call it word art. It consists of words and symbols that need to be read together. And to appreciate Basquiat, you do have to invest some time in order to be able to do that. You will pick up the crown in there toward the quadrant in the upper left. You also, I'd like you to take a look at the Basquiat with boxing gloves at the bottom. One of the things that Basquiat continues to do is scrawl on words and then scratch them out. And according to Basquiat, it is because, quote, I cross out words so you will see them more. The fact that they are obscured makes you want to read them. Perhaps that's a hint at the amount of work it takes to actually break through the codes of Jean-Michel Basquiat.